Hello, and welcome to the new Untouchables in Focus. This is a new initiative to complement our ongoing research and work to reveal insights that you won't get from mainstream media that seems to miss a lot of what we all should be focused on. And in this initial broadcast of this, I am so proud to welcome June Carbone, the Rubina Chair of Law, Science, and Technology at the University of Minnesota. She's held that position from the beginning of her time transferring from the Edward Smith Missouri Chair of Law, Constitution and Society at the University of Missouri, Kansas City. June is an expert in family law, assisted reproduction, property and law, medicine and bioethics, and also has taught contracts, remedies, financial institutions, civil procedure, and feminist jurisprudence. We are joined by her co-author, Naomi Khan, and Naomi Khan is an expert in family law, trusts and estates, feminist jurisprudence, reproductive technology, and aging and the law. Prior to joining the University of Virginia's faculty in 2020, she taught at George Washington Law School, where she twice served as associate dean. She is currently the co-director of University of Virginia's Law's Family Law Center. And I welcome you both. And it is just really extraordinary in the context of all things I'm going to call Trumpism, but that seems to be ensconced in a, shall we say, a peculiar trend with male grievance, a grievance that seems to postulate a frustration, something, a causality that is coming from a lot of different directions. And what we continue to see in mainstream media is reaction to what we would call, maybe a fire cannon of just misinformation or just the unfortunate realities of the combination of Doge and constitutionality and everything that seems to accompany this lawless presidency. But in the midst of that, what we seem to be missing is an understanding of what's taken place to basically rug pull the family, the American family, which is tied to what you folks have been working on for now years. And that come to fruition in two books that you guys have written together, Red Families and, Red Families and Blue Families, I apologize for the delay, as well as Fair Shake, Women in the Fight to Build a Just Economy. And I'll include links to both of those, as well as I'll bring those titles up here as we're speaking. But I think, June, I want to start by just setting the table, and because it is really peculiar. How is it that the GOP gets away with claiming to be the party of family values?
I call it the big lie, another big lie. And we've lived with it our entire academic careers. And the lie is economics has nothing to do with culture. You take somebody like Charles Murray who says the black family fell apart because of welfare. Then he says the white family is now falling apart too. It has nothing to do with economics. Welfare, as we know it, was abolished. It's moral values. The elite should be yelling at the lazy bums who aren't working three jobs to support their family at a minimum wage that hasn't increased in the last half century. That's a lie. And it has three parts. The first is political. When you look at the politics of family values, it's about fear, discomfort, disgust. In the 80s, it was about the sexual revolution, and it focused on banning teaching sex education in schools and making contraception available to prevent pregnancies. Ronald Reagan tried to cut back on federal funding of contraception. In the 90s, it was focused on abortion, which solidified a coalition between Catholics and evangelicals, who used to be the most anti-Catholic group in the country, but came around to joining Catholics in the fight against abortion, which is really the opening wedge in Christian nationalism. In the 2000s, George W. Bush, family values in 2004 was all about fear about gays. Hey, don't let the gays into marriage, it will destroy marriage. And then once marriage equality was accepted by a majority of the public, it focused on trans. These are all about fear mongering. But in the background, again, that's the politics. What's going on in the academy? Well, people get all the attention in the academy are um, are in economics. Those of us who are not economists are sometimes jealous of how they get to set the agenda. Almost all of the economics of the family is bunk. They start with Gary Becker, who said the family is going to help because women are going to work. How terrible. And then the economists recognize that everything Becker predicted is wrong, and they move on to saying economics cannot explain culture. The academics say that. Melissa Carney has a new book out on marriage. She is an ambitious economist. She did a clever study of fracking in North Dakota and says, look, if you put unexpected money in the hands of transient young men, you get more babies, you don't get more marriage. Therefore, having better jobs cannot bring back marriage. It's all cultural. Except a better economist, David O'Toole at Harvard, whom she cites and acknowledges is a good economist, did a study of the China shock and what happened when plants closed. Plants closing correlate with declines in marriage or greater divorce or destabilization of the family, but we can't talk about that. And why can economists not talk about it? Well, O'Toole can talk about it because he does get funding. But I had a very prominent economist, Margaret Blair, who writes about corporate theory, say, we only really study that which gets funded. We don't fund important studies of the family. And so that then leads to practicalities. I did with Eleanor Brown a study. What happened after the financial crisis? Well, it turns out the increase in Black women's student loan debt discouraged marriage rates. Black college graduates used to marry at very high levels. That's decreased. Student loan debt is one of the reasons. There are only small scale studies by sociologists who even ask the question. When you look at foreclosures, they increase divorce rates. Again, something that you see only small scale studies, no public attention. So you've got, at a practical level, a set of policies that have been around for a half century that have made this worse. And the big, beautiful bill is the worst of all. Naomi, do you want to add something to that picture, the overall picture?
Well, I do want to point out that this is something that I don't think has gotten enough attention, but the Department of Transportation issued an order saying that transportation projects should, to the extent possible, be located in areas that have higher marriage and birth rates than the national average. Now, interesting, marriage and birth rates aren't necessarily tied together, but the goal was to locate these projects in communities with higher marriage rates than the national average. And so when we're talking about family values, when we're talking about a president who is on his third wife, and has multiple fertility, that is, he's got children with multiple spouses. And we're talking about pro-family values. We're seeing that implemented in this Department of Transportation directive. And yet, for all of the reasons that June says, the relationship between economics, the relationship between communities with higher marriage rates than normal, very, very complex. And June's already mentioned that with Eleanor Brown, the three of us have done some writing about just what is the connection between culture, marriage, and economics. And it turns out it is true that a high proportion of single parents are likely to live in poverty, but even higher than that, children whose parents have less than a high school education are the most likely to live in poverty. And so it's education that has a great deal to do with children's well-being or at least with children's ability not to be in poverty. And so if what we're looking at shouldn't be marriage rates, What we're looking at, or what we should be looking at, is the ability to get a good job, and not just any good job, not just fracking brings in money, but a stable job, and to be able to get education. That's what's correlated with children's outcomes.
Boy, I have heard over the course of the last several months of discussion with June this notion of instability being a feature of the system. And I'm hearing that, especially in this micro diagnostic of the, by the way, who did you cite as the government agency that is determining where to do the,
Department of Transportation, and
oh, the
I
Department of,
will send you that link so you can post just what it is.
that was
And
fascinating. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Patrick, so this is doing two things. It is pretending to be about family values. It is, in fact, a way of channeling more money to heavily white, conservative areas that support MAGA.
Wow. Talking about Orwellian, and to use a unfortunately overused phrase in social media these days, but really the causality though goes back now decades, and we're talking about really. I, I mean, I just have to ask just the kind of the nature of you know blue state value. I mean, blue family values versus red family values, and I think the correlation that I haven't heard yet juxtaposed, but seems to be something that would bridge both of these things is the nature of religion. How does that play in?
June, go for it.
Okay, so in a way, it's getting ahead of our story because you do have a threat to the family, and that threat to the family comes from the decline in blue collar jobs, and anybody who's honest admits that. I mean, the conservatives we talk to tell us, yeah, that's a big part of the story. But now the question is, what's the response to it? So when we wrote Red Families versus Blue Families in 2010, what we described was the upper middle class secular response. And we call that blue family values. Postpone marriage, first, invest in both men and women's earning capacity. The social safety net for the upper middle class are two incomes. Postpone marriage and childbearing until the couple have reached a point of economic stability and emotional maturity. Emotional maturity helps trade off. You know, one party gets laid off, one party decides they're at a dead end in their high pressure job and can't take it anymore. Go back to school. How do you afford that? You afford that by you afford that by having a spouse who helps support. When my husband Bill went back and got a PhD, I was earning enough to support our three kids and a mortgage in Silicon Valley. So we could do that. We could trade off. But people with less money can't trade off. Now, how did Red respond to that? By doubling down in religion. And you have to say there are two parts to the doubling down in religion. When you look at conservative Republican college graduates, they're much more likely to be religious. And what arose during this time period were Christian clubs on college campuses. Evangelicals used to be the working poor. Evangelical groups started to arise on Ivy League college campuses. And what they did was to fuse religious values with a limit on sex. If college campuses were rife with all kinds of sex going on without commitment, Christian clubs were a way of finding somebody who shared your values. But as they emerged, there is this overlapping identity of politics, conservative republicanism, religion, and earlier ages of marriage. Now, that doesn't translate very well to people who don't go to college. But what you do see is if you want to predict marriage rates and marriage rates at young ages, they're much more likely to occur in red states and in places where housing is affordable. One of the reasons to get married is you're going to buy a house. If you're not going to buy a house, whether you marry or not doesn't matter so much. You don't have any money, getting married it's a bad deal for women in those circumstances, and it doesn't much matter. In conservative areas of the country, they're much more likely to marry at younger ages and to marry because the woman got pregnant. And there are two things. For the people who are well off, who buy houses, who are college graduates, who have good jobs, and churches help you get good jobs, that marriage may work. But for people in the same communities who marry young without good jobs, the divorce rates are the highest in the country. Um, Andrew Cherlin wrote a book called A Marriage Go Round that points out that American marriages are less stable than European cohabitations. And when you say is who are these people who marry, get divorced, and remarry, or just live together thereafter? In religious parts of the country, again, what you have is the people who belong to the same church attend together. The husband has a good job. The wife accepts the husband as head of the family. The marriages aren't bad. I mean, the divorce rates are lower than in some other areas. But in those same communities, the men who don't have good jobs, who get married because the woman got pregnant, um, or who simply have less stable lives but married young, they have some of the highest divorce rates in the country. They may live down the street from each other, they may attend the same church, but the group with the high divorce rates, when things go south, stop attending church. The group that stays together when things go south, the church gets them a new job. Again, it's the difference between being, plugged into a community where you are among the more successful parts of that community and the working class who throughout the country are seeing their lives fall apart. Okay? Now, if we want to do, let's show the slides and then I'll have Naomi talk about this.
Can you see
I
them
want
from that screen?
to,
Can
Yeah,
you
I
see
can.
them?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, I can see them. I do, and I'm sure we'll come back to this, but I've said, marriage rates vary by religion, but they also vary by education. And so there are just so many different ways to slice marriage and divorce rates. Religion is certainly one of them. And I know we'll come back to this, but education is another. All right, let's go with the slides.
yeah, so again, there is this preaching, and it's gotten more intense of late, that if women would just accept men as heads of the family, bow down and worship them, yes, sir, that marriage will be better. And if you read Josh Hawley's book, he says, yeah, and we got to teach those guys to support the family. And if you read Charles Murray, he says, we got to yell at the guys who aren't supporting the family. But where are they supposed to get the jobs from? So let's run through a couple of statistics. First, how many men have been unemployed at some point over the preceding 10 years? Note what happens among the highly educated when you look at changes over time. There is no change. The percentage of men with college degrees who have been unemployed in the last few years um, hasn't changed much. It has gone up for the moderately educated. It has gone up more dramatically for the less educated. Note that the middle group and the highly educated group used to be about the same. They're not anymore. And let me emphasize, these are comparisons done in the mid 2000s. Why? Because we don't have good studies of employment and stability coming from economists, who are the people who study this, because it isn't being funded. Let's go to the next slide, which is being studied. This is the kind of stuff Charles Murray likes to talk about. This is men's declining participation in the labor market. Now, again, you see when you're looking at, and Patrick, I can't see the label on the blue number. I
Okay,
think, is that non-college grads, I think.
I believe so.
Okay.
It
Below
says
BA. It's
below.
below BA. It's B red is BA and above, below BA is the blue one.
Okay. When you look at the thick gray line, that's the financial crisis. So what you see before the financial crisis is that, yeah, people without college degrees were less likely to be in the labor market. Note what happens after the financial crisis. And these are men below the age of 34. So these are young men. You have a plummeting in the number of men in the labor market. Now, in the labor market means employers are looking for work. You see a slight uptake, especially during, the recovery, which, by the way, is stalled because of Mitch McConnell's fiscal cliff. Mitch McConnell blocked any further stimulus after 2010, delaying the recovery from the financial crisis. The recovery, when people have these rosy recollections of the first Trump term, what they're remembering is the recovery from the financial crisis that got delayed because Mitch McConnell and later Paul Ryan blocked any further stimulus. And these numbers reflect the Great Recession. So you have a very substantial decline in labor market participation. Now, let's go to the next slide, and we'll stop there for now. This is, I think, the key slide. And again, I love this slide because this is by a prominent sociologist. Again, economists don't study this stuff. Here's what the sociologists have to say. This is a snapshot of people in 1980, people in the year 2000. In 1980, yes, people who are experiencing more economic distress are more divorce prone. But look at what happens in the year 2000. People who are experiencing high levels of economic distress have become dramatically more divorce prone. People who are not experiencing economic distress have become substantially less divorce prone. Why? A lot of this is the class divide. So when you look at what we call blue families, the upper middle class postpones marriage and childbearing until both parties have graduated from college, have maybe switched cities a couple of times, have certainly switched jobs a couple of times, have done internships, have now landed jobs that are relatively secure, where the woman can have kids and get paid family leave without losing her job. Okay? If you look at that, that group has a strategy that works. They are less divorce prone. If you have college graduates embedded in a religious community, they're less divorce prone too. But the people outside those groups, the working class, that group for whom economic instability has become dramatically greater, who worry, who can't, 40% of the country can't pay out of pocket for an unexpected medical bill. It will bankrupt, or they'll have to sacrifice putting food on the table for their kids or give up something else. If the car breaks down or you run up speeding tickets, they can't afford to pay. You may lose your license, then you can't get to your job. For that group, family instability has increased dramatically with compounding reasons. Now, when I say compounding reasons, is culture part of this? Yes. People who are stressed live with roommates to whom they're not really committed and accidentally get pregnant. That's bad for family stability. Again, there are a whole series of reasons, but this picture is a picture of a class divide that for all classes is exacerbated by economic instability. And we can talk about why. But this is the picture that we do not hear discussion of in policy circles. Again, the sociologists know about it, they talk about it, but you don't hear a discussion of this picture in policy circles. Naomi, do you want to add to this?
I'll just say, I think the focus on marriage completely misses the point of what's going on in families, and for that matter, what's going on with the economy. If we're focusing on marriage, we are not necessarily focusing on children's well-being or not focusing on the well-being of anybody who is part of that marriage. And we're certainly not looking at the socioeconomic situation in which they live. Marriage turns out to be a really convenient talking point that, when it comes to how families are faring, should not be the focus. I think that's a summary of much of the work that we have done looking at how to promote stable childhoods, stable families.
Patrick, if I can jump in, I have a very different take on this. Naomi, were you with me when we talked about this analysis with Sarah McLanahan?
Don't think so.
Okay, so I was there, and Sarah gave her presentation. Sarah McLanahan, who's passed away, was a brilliant sociologist. And she was presenting, and indeed, in terms of work that has gotten attention, she did some of the early studies showing the class divide. So, Patrick, can you put the slides back up?
Sure, just give me 1 second.
Okay. When you look at the class divide, you see a class divide in marriage, in divorce, and in children being raised in single parent families. And Sarah was one of the first to really call attention to it, in part because she uh, she did something called the Fragile Families, and it was looking at the fact that non-marital births are overwhelmingly two women who are cohabiting, not true single mothers. But those relationships don't last. Now, look at the divorce rates by education. What you see is that those who are college graduates, the divorce rates leveled off in the 90s and have stayed relatively low. The divorce rates used to increase together. People went to college, people who didn't go to college, their divorce rates increased in tandem. Then they leveled off for college graduates and continued to increase for those with some college or less. Go to the next slide. When you look at children's childhoods, okay, those with college degrees, yeah, they increased a little bit, but they decreased after the 1990s. Why did they decrease after the 1990s? Because women who were 200% of the poverty line or more, their unintended pregnancy rates fell in half. What happened for people with high school degrees or less? The number of children who spend some time, part of their childhood, in a single parent family has increased steadily throughout this period. Some of the answer is an increase in the 90s, in the period from the 1990s to 2008. Women below the poverty line saw their unintended pregnancy rates increase by 50%. After the financial crisis, the unintended pregnancy rates plummeted, but so did family instability. Okay? Now, here's the thing about what Naomi is saying about marriage. So, I presented some of this work. Sarah presented a much more detailed account, and the law professors in the audience attacked us. How dare you talk about marriage? This is during a period before marriage equality. And Sarah was absolutely befuddled by this, partly because she's a sociologist. She's describing this, she is not giving a normative take on it. And she said, but look, aren't you concerned about a class-based divergence in family patterns? You got to know about this, and you got to ask the question, why is this happening to people who are worse off and not happening to people who are better off? That's a really important question. And to echo what Naomi says, the policy part, George W. Bush, he had marriage promotion programs. They're really welfare for Christian nationalists who want to proselytize, don't have sex outside of marriage, get married. It did nothing, did no good whatsoever to preach to people who can't afford to get married. You should get married. Why did they attend? Because they were paid $100 for attending and they really needed the $100. Okay? Give people money and you'll make their lives better. Preach to them about marriage. It's absolute BS. So the marriage program, the emphasis on marriage is BS. But as a diagnostic tool, it's not. What you see in these slides is marriage and family form and family stability have emerged as a marker of class. And that marker of class is telling you what inequality is doing to the family. So we sent the slides, and I want to drive home 2 points. I don't actually care if people get married or not. I don't think it makes much difference. I think family and stability matters. I think, if you read about J.D. Vance's childhood, part of what he's furious at his mother about is the number of men who cycle in and out of their lives. Okay? He wanted a father. A father was committed to him, and he was there for his entire childhood. He got what Andrew Cherlin calls the marriage go-round. Men who cycle in and out of his life. That's not good. There are a lot of negative effects from that alone. But now let's ask, what causes the class divide? So we started off with instability and volatility of income, instability of employment. But I want to emphasize there are two things that then translate that into lower rates of marriage. The first, we're lawyers. Marriage is a terrible deal for women paired with unreliable partners. Why? The classic marriage deal, there are two marriage deals, and they work. He makes a whole lot of money and she takes care of the house. When you look at women, when you look at marriages in the upper quintile, 70% of men earn, husbands earn more than their wives, and above 250,000 a year in total family income, you see relatively traditional patterns. In the middle of the economy, you see the trade we talked about. Egalitarian marriages, both parties work at least some, they trade off childcare and housework. But if they're well off, they can afford cleaning crews so nobody has to clean the toilets. Those are relatively happy marriages. Go farther down the economic ladder. What does instability do? Well, we've got all these studies. What happened during the Great Recession? Men who are laid off are right up there with alcoholics as the ones most likely to abuse their partners. What happens to housework? Men who are laid off help out less around the house than men who are employed full time. What about women? Women whose partners aren't pulling their own weight in terms of bringing in money tend to have more stable jobs and they feel more compelled to work longer hours. But they work longer hours and also do more around the house. And they're angry. They're angry because they're now doing more both economically and in terms of housework. That's a pretty bad deal. And even if you don't have, the man doing anything except sitting in front of the TV set, note that ads for refrigerator repair school increased on the Cartoon Network during the Great Recession. Okay? Absorb that. Who's watching the Cartoon Network who wants to go to refrigerator repair school? Again, what you have is, and we summarize it this way, men who are on the losing end of male status hierarchies feel bad about themselves, and that makes them worse partners. The inability to pay the bills leads to divorce. Now, women, who get in a car crash and lose their jobs, women who have unexpected expenses, they also become more likely to abuse various substances, not to help out full time. The destabilization of the family is not because of a loss of income. There's not a calculus like economists like to measure. Oh, he's bringing in, he lost overtime. He brings in $100 a week less this week. I'm going to divorce him. No, that's not what happens. What happens is the people who lose overtime, who lose status, become more likely to pick up the bar tab at the local pub, become more likely to mope, become less engaged partners. That destabilizes relationships. And there's more going on. So, what I want to say is the decline in marriage is, it's a sign of what's wrong. But marriage wouldn't fix what's wrong.
Right.
And so, what you should focus on more is family instability. Again, cycling through partnerships and relationships that don't last are bad for kids. And those have a correlation with increased economic volatility, with financial stresses. And so, what we're seeing is a problem, and marriage is a symbol of it. But marriage by itself can't fix it.
Right. Just to echo that, we absolutely agree. Marriage, the divergence in marriage rates by education is a sign that something is wrong. The something that is wrong will not be solved by increasing marriage. The something that is wrong will be solved by attacking economic inequality. That's where the real issue is. And so, marriage, yes, marriage does bring two or more people for each child, but that's not the solution overall to economic inequality. So we can provide stability for children, we can foster more stable families, but marriage is not the answer for that. Marriage is a sign of what's wrong, but we should stop there.
Can I just interact in a couple of ways that I'm personally getting this information? And I want to say something that's not in the numbers, but I just want to say this out loud because I find it fascinating. So, in my age range of people that are college educated, many guys that, maybe have got just a BA and they didn't go further, but they lived in good communities and they came from good families. Many of these guys are now into their second or third marriages to women that are incredibly successful, mostly in the financial sector. And these guys have kind of done a role reversal where they're taking care of the families and they're, actually being able to buy toys and things that just they haven't even tried to achieve anymore in their own careers. They're relying on women who have been successful. I wonder if any of that data ever shows up in some of these analytics that you guys have seen. I'm sure it's a tiny percent, but that's a direct correlation to actual economics.
Yeah, this is one of the things. So one thing is when I give these talks on college campuses, I always get people in the audience say to me, but you know, we live in a college town, the trailing spouse is taking care of the kids, and we've got this wonderful marriage. That's under 10%. Where the father is the primary caretaker is really under 10%. Um, in addition, and I do want to emphasize this, we women initiate two-thirds of divorces. They did, by the way, before no-fault divorce. Betsy Stevenson emphasizes, though, that one of the consequences, she's an economist at the University of Michigan, that one of the consequences of no-fault divorce is women's suicide rates drop by close to a third. So women are the ones who are the emotional gatekeepers in relationships. They tend to initiate divorces. And sometimes, I mean, the in the Amato studies, the one of the things that's very striking is the number of men who don't see it coming. And it's women who are unhappy with the emotional quality of the relationship. And often the husband doesn't necessarily recognize what went wrong until it's too late to fix it. And we've spent a lot of time looking at that data, and among better off couples, I mean, I can give you lots of stories of that too. So if her career is taking off and his isn't, the couple may increasingly have less in common over time. And I can give you stories of both men and women who have called it quits at that point. But it tends to be a stressor in divorce on both sides. Again, that also, economic instability, including unexpected success, destabilizes relationships. And go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, Philip Cahn, who's an amazing sociologist at University of Maryland, has done some work on looking at the changing trends in women earning more. And it's all, I should add, it's all in heterosexual marriages. It's of women earning more than their husbands. And yeah, in 1990, 15% of wives earn more than their spouses, which is double the number of women who earn more than their spouses in 1970. And today it's upwards of 25%. And this is Philip's but, so let me give him credit. Philip's but is that it turns out that in those couples where the woman earns more than the man, it's just a little bit more. It's if you think of it's not nearly as much as how much more the man earns. And these are his statistics. It's almost, first of all, it's almost 9 times more common for a husband to earn all of the money than a wife in a marriage. So we've still got that statistic. And the average wife who earns more takes home about 2/3 of the couple's earnings. The average for higher earning men is 82%. So if we're talking about imbalance in couples, where even where the woman earns more, she doesn't earn as much more as does the man who's the higher earner. So, yes, it's certainly true, as June said, as you've said, we know those couples, but women are still not earning the same kinds of salaries as men. It is, however, I mean, the other phenomenon that you're pointing to is that it's much more common for married women, for married white women today, at least, to be earning money than it was, say, I don't know, 70 or 80 years ago. So that's certainly a change to continue to have married white women in the job market.
Well, I didn't want to
But
take this.
no, can I add one more statistic? In the top quintile, husbands, something like 70 to 80% of husbands out earning their wives. In the bottom quintile, it's the exact opposite. 70 to 80% of wives earn more than their husbands. So I think that the figure is probably 70% in both groups. In the middle, you are far more likely to see men and women both working and earning incomes that are close to each other. One may be higher than the other. But I want to emphasize it's not that per se, it's the change. So if you got married thinking, okay, the husband's going to earn more, the wife's going to do most of the housework. A lot of studies of working class couples, by the way, you have women saying, yeah, I'll live with the guy, but I'm not going to marry him unless he's worth it. And when they explain what that means, it's, oh, well, if we're living together, if we're just roommates, then what the house looks like, it's not on me. If we're married and the house is a mess because he leaves his dirty clothes all over the place and I don't pick them up, it is on me. So he's got to be worth it because I'm going to do a whole lot more when it comes to housework. If they don't get married, I mean, and again, I'm talking about low income families, not enlightened college graduates who are woke and don't get married because they don't believe in it. But if you look at working class couples and they don't get married, the community norms are the woman is the primary caretaker. She looks out for the kids. The relationship ends. She kicks him out. She keeps the kids. Yes, stay on her good side if she wants, if you want to see them. If they get married, then she kicks him out. She's the one who wants the end of the relationship. Overwhelmingly, the end is precipitated by the woman's act, even if they both want it. She ends the relationship. If she wants the divorce, she's got to go to court, bear the burden. It's inconvenient, it's expensive, and no court will grant the divorce without giving him custodial rights if he wants them, and imposing a child support order. So with low-income couples, they don't really, I mean, the woman certainly doesn't want it. And if she thinks he's economically unreliable, which typically low-income men are, for reasons that may or may not be within their control, the child support order is meaningless if he's not going to pay, but the custodial order is not meaningless. And so they lose by marrying because the norms in the community are they don't marry. She controls the kids. She controls access to the kids. If he wants to see the kids, he needs to pay. But she negotiates that with him. If they marry and are subject to a court, they don't control either the amount of child support, which is set in accordance with guidelines and may be higher than he can afford, nor do they control custodial rights, where the court will grant him custodial rights even if he's not paying support and even if he's abusive, absent really dramatic facts that capture the attention of the court on the abuse. So it's a bad deal. They lose control if they marry. If they don't marry, it's a very different kind of relationship. And when working class women say he's got to be worth it, he has to be reliable, he has to respect her, but he has to contribute 50%, whether it's taking care of the kids and cleaning house or the income.
I'll also add to that. It's true that in all marriages, except where the wife is the sole breadwinner, in all other marriages, women are still more likely to do much more of the caregiving and of the housework. And so you have to be willing to do that if you're going to get married, and you have to understand that bargain. And marriage, as June just said, imposes a series of both default and override rules with respect to sharing of income and expectations of responsibilities.
The
Yeah, and
question,
let me add to that. There's a class divide in that too. So, college graduate men do dramatically more in terms of childcare than their fathers did. I mean, the change, generational change for college graduate men is immense. Women also do more than their mothers in terms of the amount of one-on-one interaction with children. The women do less housework than their mothers. They do more childcare than their mothers. When you then look at people who don't go to college, the men also do more, but not nearly as dramatically more. And so you still have relatively traditional attitudes about gender roles in the working class, people who don't go to college. Among college graduate men, and one reason why among college graduates, the U.S. fertility rate is higher than places like Korea or China, is that American men do a whole lot more and expect to do a whole lot more, especially when it comes to child rearing.
the question that I have, circling back kind of the beginning of just the infrastructure of the paradigm of how families have changed over the course of the scope of your research, as the data has indicated, there was a shattering of the American family structure after the 2008 great financial crisis. And now, roughly 15 years later, we're looking at, sort of, I'm going to say, a smoke and mirrors approach to tariffs and all of the other elements to try to supposedly reconstruct an American middle class. But we know that's not what's happening. We know that there is a subterfuge of backdoor payments and channels to Trump and the administration, and that's far afield from what this discussion is. But as it relates to a real economy, one of stability, one of especially in context to technology and all of the sort of impact of what we're seeing from AI and so forth. Can you both address kind of the moment that we're in based on your decades long of research, and then ultimately looking forward, what is the reality of this patchwork sort of presumption that we're going to recreate a paradigm of stability, so to speak, versus the reality? And
Naomi, do you want to go
I
first?
was going to say, go ahead.
So, in 2011, there was a retrospective on the Moynihan Report, and the summary by sociologists, the summary was what Moynihan really found was whenever you have a society without a meaningful role for men, marriage declines, family stability suffers, and it's to the disadvantage of women and children. I will say there is kind of a dissent to the report from women, especially Black women, saying, and the vilification of Black women in the Moynihan Report was totally unjustified. And that's really what we've been talking about. When you say, what is the cause of the decline in the family? The lack of a meaningful social role for men is huge. Our book Marriage Markets showed there are more men at the top, there are more high income men. And guess what? The women they marry tend to play traditional roles. The only group in American society whose marriage rates have increased is the top 10% of women by income. Why? Because, Mark Zuckerberg wanted to marry a Harvard medical school graduate. He did not want to marry a Hollywood starlet. High status women and high status men marry each other, and high status men want to marry high status women. I'm not going to say anything about Jeff Bezos. Um, but so you see that work. When you look at the bottom half of the population, what you see is women tend to be in more stable jobs. Uh, Nursing, healthcare has increased dramatically. What's increased for men? Construction. That's cyclical. Entrepreneurship, that's cyclical. These are unstable jobs with volatile income. Now, what does the Trump administration propose to do? Make the wealthy better off, squeeze the poor. If you see, I mean, we've spent a lot of time looking at Medicaid and work requirements. That will increase family instability. Take a guy, he is a plaintiff in a lawsuit, dismissed because the Biden administration eliminated the regs, but these were work requirements. He had cancer. He's in his 40s. He does construction. His income is volatile anyway. He's got to go on these sites every month. But some months he can't work because he's doing chemo. Some months he can't find a job. Other months he is employed, but the website is hard to navigate. You've got to fill out these forms twice a month. He loses his Medicaid. He can't afford his chemo. He loses his Medicaid. He racks up bills that he needs to stay alive. And he's more likely to go into bankruptcy. Bankruptcy also increases rates of family dissolution. The Medicaid requirements are an anti-family measure. They will increase family instability. When you look at Obamacare, one of the interesting statistics is the most important impact on death rates is a decline in the number of Black boys under the age of 6 who died because they have the accident instead of waiting until, he's about to die. They take him to they get health care earlier, which leads to better outcomes. This will increase deaths. The statistics on that are, rock solid, but it will also destabilize families because unexpected healthcare costs that make it more likely the family will go bankrupt destabilize its relationships. This is an anti-family measure. I could say about fertility, but Naomi, you want to comment on any of this first?
Yeah, no, I was going to turn to looking at fertility, and it's interesting that in the abortion ban states, the birth rate is rising. I mean, overall, we have to say that post-Dobbs, the number of abortions nationwide has certainly not decreased in the way that anti-abortion advocates might have certainly hoped for and might have expected. But nonetheless, the number of children born in states with abortion bans has gone up, high infant mortality rates, et cetera. And there was a wonderful longitudinal study, the Turnaway study, which revealed that when you don't allow women to have the abortions that they are seeking, that can negatively impact not just their existing children, but of course also the children who are ultimately born as a result of the abortion that was denied. And so if we look at the impact of defunding Planned Parenthood, for example, another thing that's going on, if we look at that impact, that denies not just reproductive care, but all kinds of other health screenings for which people go to Planned Parenthood offices. And so looking at the impact, so what that is likely to do is it's all likely to increase the number of children who are born, the number of children who are born outside of marriage, and it's likely to continue to change family structure.
In a way that will not increase marriage and will lead to a larger number of impoverished children with poor health outcomes and bad perspectives for adulthood. But I want to talk about fertility for a moment before we leave. So I spent a lot of time looking at these rates. The US used to have a fertility of 2.1 above replacement, one of the highest in the developed world. And the reason was the Latina birth rate. And here's what doesn't get studied. So I mentioned the fracking study. Put unexpected money in the hands of young men, birth rate goes up. The increase in Latina births corresponded with the construction boom that started in the 90s and built up all the way until the crash in the great financial crisis. When you look at Latinos in particular, You don't see a rise in construction wages, hourly wages in general. That's because Latinos flood into that sector. When you look at undocumented immigrants, at the height of the construction boom, undocumented immigrants were among the biggest beneficiaries. And undocumented women were among the least likely to have access to contraception. So, in the period of the construction boom, if you look at women under the poverty line, the unattended birth rate increases by 50%. And this is a group largely without access to contraception, especially when you're talking about the immigrant community. I haven't heard any discussion of it that links it to the construction boom or the employment part of this. But Latinos are heavily concentrated in construction during the boom. Now, when the crash occurs, the fertility rates plummet. The initial decline in fertility rates, 50% of the decline is attributed to a decline in Latina births. All the sociologists say we have an end of immigration. It's net negative for Mexico during those years. It shifts afterwards to refugees, not people seeking to work in construction. And this is where the big decline in American fertility occurs. And the initial decline is concentrated among the poorest women and particularly among Latinas. Fast forward to today, that decline in fertility has increased. A much higher percentage of the recent decrease is due to access to long-acting contraception, to the pill, to IUDs, etc., to LARCs, which are long-acting contraceptives, okay? That requires access to publicly subsidized contraception. And what you're seeing in the most recent figures, this is post-2016, is the initial decrease was single women. The big decrease today is in cohabiting women. Lots of women cohabit because they need somebody to help pay the rent. The poorer they are, the less likely that relationship is to be committed. But the poorer they are, the more likely cohabitation is to lead to pregnancy with somebody to whom you're not committed. That's where the biggest declines have been occurring. That's largely a good thing. You don't want a whole lot of accidental pregnancies between people who have no commitment to each other. This is where marriage really is better. Being in a stable two-parent relationship with commitment is a better foundation for childhood. But the biggest declines in fertility have occurred exactly where, as a matter of public policy, you would hope they would occur. And what the Trump administration is doing is trying to reverse those trends. It will cut access to state-subsidized contraception and is doing so in a variety of ways, in addition to abortion. And so, yes, it's saying, how do we have more non-marital births among men and women who are not prepared to take care of the resulting child, with the result that the children who are born will be less productive adults than a pro-family policy would actually produce.
Well, I appreciate both of your times. That time just flew by, and I found it so incredibly fascinating and profoundly important. And, just in context to our ongoing discussions, it's just diabolical to consider over the course of the last many decades that the party of family really is designing an environment of instability that fractures families in a way that winds up fracturing society. Is it any wonder, and this is just a parting comment, that we are in such diabolical straits at the moment with an inverted totalitarianism, if that's one way I look at it, but that serves the uber rich at the expense of a society that is dynamic, that depends on the rule of law, that can also help stability. So until we're able to find that balance, we're certainly not going to find the balance in our marriages. that's that's the destruction of society writ large. And so I'm going to share the screen here really quickly if I can get to the right screen. I want to show the titles of your books so that people can see this in the chat. And just really quickly, if I can get to it, I've got, man, might not be able to get to it because of just the way.
Amazon, there's Amazon.
Yeah, we've got red families and blue families. And then, of course, we've got Fair Shake, Women in the Fight to Build a Just Economy. And I'll include that with links in the description below. Naomi Khan, thank you so much for your time. June Carbone, thank you so much for your time. And until next time, be well.
Thank you.